Hello and welcome to the test screening. I'm Billy.
I'm Chloe. We're two film school graduates and cinephiles who can't seem to get enough of the big screen.
So now we're bringing you our weekly insights into the biggest releases, hottest topics, and forgotten classics every Monday.
Hello and welcome back to the test screening. My name is Chloe.
And my name's Billy.
And today we're going to start our conversation by talking about the Screen Actors Guild Awards and the Independent Spirit Awards and the Producers Guild of America Awards that both happened within the past couple of weeks. So do you want to talk us through some of the winners and what your thoughts were?
Yeah, so Everything Everywhere All at Once had particular success at the Independent Spirit Awards, where it picked up 7 prizes for Best Feature, Best Director for the Daniels, Best Lead Performance for Michelle Yeoh, Best Supporting Performance for Ki Hoi Kwan, Best Breakthrough Performance for Stephanie Zhu, Best Screenplay, and Best Editing, which I was particularly happy about because I don't think it's getting enough acknowledgement for the editing wizardry that goes on in that film. So he had really great success there. The top prize at the Producers Guild of America Awards for outstanding producing for a theatrical motion picture went to Everything Everywhere All at Once, alongside most of the Oscar Best Picture category being nominated there. So it took out all of that competition. And then of the 4 film awards at the Screen Actors Guild Awards, Everything Everywhere took Best Motion Picture Cast, so the Best Ensemble, Best Female Actor in a Leading Role for Michelle Yeoh, and then Ki Hui Kwan took Best Male Supporting Actor.
It's really interesting because thinking about how well it did at the BAFTAs, which was it didn't really win the major awards that we predicted it might. Do you think that it will go on to do well at the Oscars?
I think there's an argument that yes, we may be setting ourselves up for disappointment, but historically, the BAFTAs haven't always been the number one indicator of how well a film will do when it comes to the Oscars. I think normally people tend to point more towards award ceremonies from the US, like the Golden Globes, like the SAG Awards, particularly. I mean, a lot of critics I find online say that the film that wins Best Ensemble at the SAG Awards tends to go on and have a really good chance at taking home Best Picture at the Oscars, which of course, and the fact that Everything Everywhere has taken home that plus the other 3, awards for singular actors, does fill me with quite a bit of hope.
If A24 win with Everything Everywhere All at Once, how many Oscars will they have under their belt?
So they definitely have 3 for Moonlight. Brie Larson, Best Actress for Room, Best Documentary Feature for Amy. Ex Machina won Best Visual Effects in the year that that came out, and that was an A24 film. They've uh, received a total of 49 Academy Award nominations as of 2023, which is a pretty big deal. And they've, with those 3 that I'm seeing there and the 3 wins from Moonlight, that's at least 6 wins, which is pretty good going considering, and that's across 4 separate films. And they have a Best Picture win under their belt as well. I think especially when Netflix is pulling for big award success with things like All Quiet on the Western Front, which, considering it's 7 BAFTA wins, is a pretty heavy hitter as well. I think if and when streaming is such a big commodity at the moment in the film industry, I think if A24 pulled off another big sweep, or even just the Best Picture win in the acting wins, I think that would be a massive deal for this year in cinema if they managed to pull that off.
So we're going to move on now to our first review, and it is Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. So this is the latest Marvel film involving Paul Rudd as Ant-Man. What were your thoughts?
So I don't know about you, but I've not really been impressed by, aside from Spider-Man No Way Home, I've not really been impressed with the majority of the Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, Shang-Chi, even though I thought they were decent. I'm kind of jaded with Marvel at this point. Although I still kind of went in with as open a mind as I could have, so that I could, give it an even-handed and balanced review. And one thing that actually kind of does stand Ant-Man in good stead already, before I, even go into my base level viewing experience, is that I really enjoy this ensemble on screen. Obviously, going back to Lost and that show holding a special place in my heart, I'm already a big fan of Evangeline Lilly. I'm starting to believe it's basically scientifically impossible to dislike Paul Rudd. the ma- the man is just so instantaneously likable. It's ridiculous.
He could be the answer to world peace.
I think world leaders need to take a hint. I think they need to get him on board. But Michael Douglas is clearly relishing the humour of his part. He seems to be having a whale of a time playing opposite the great Michelle Pfeiffer as well, with whom I think he has great chemistry, as do Paul Rudd and Evangeline Lilly. The actress who plays Paul Rudd's daughter, her name escapes me, but I think she's solid too. She balances her rebellious and sarcastic teenage and young adult attitude with genuine affection for her father really well. Unfortunately, there are kind of numerous problems which drag Ant-Man down. I mean, I thought the first Ant-Man was just unbelievably bland, and then Ant-Man and the Wasp was a big pick me up. And whilst I don't dislike this as much as the original Ant-Man, I do think it's a step down from the second entry in this particular series. For starters, the bulk of the runtime takes place in the quantum realm, kind of this microscopic, interdimensional world. And, by admission, that is going to be incredibly, CGI laden, very heavy on visual effects to construct that environment. And necessarily in principle, I don't, have a problem with that. But if the film's going to be taking place largely in a world that's completely disconnected from the real world, you need to make sure that that setting then feels credible, lived in, and authentic within the context that the MCU world has established. And whilst Quantumania does a decent job of making that space feel lived in, there's these creatively and extravagantly costumed tribes of quantum people and kind of strange shape-shifting beings and rebel factions. It feels like there is sort of a number of different communities bouncing off each other within that space, and it does feel lived in as a result. And they're played with great humor and bounce by people like William Jackson Harper, who we played Chidi in The Good Place, who we both love, and also Bill Murray in a really uh, fun cameo. What ends up being a massive issue is the actual look of the visual effects and the characters against those CGI backdrops. For a major studio release with a $200 million budget, there is absolutely no excuse for the CGI and the blue screen in Ant-Man to look this distractingly lackluster. There were so many points where I was genuinely appalled at how terrible the blue screen looks in many sequences and how obvious it is that the actors are standing in front of one. They just look so plastic and so disconnected and so separate from the actual background of the environment they're standing in. I mean, this isn't exactly new. It was starting to get like worryingly creaky in Shang-Chi. I was starting to go, oh, that blue screen looks a bit suspect. But this is like a new level of bad for the franchise, and it completely destroys any sense that the characters are actually situated in this world, which, for a good 80% of the runtime, I just kept thinking, that's a set, that's a soundstage, that's a green screen. It completely nullified any immersion I had in that world, which then destroys my own investment in the actual story. And that's then further exacerbated by the fact that in terms of the screenplay, I feel that Quantumania actually struggles to even justify its base existence within the grander scheme of the MCU's narrative canon. Whilst on paper, like fighting a villain in the quantum realm and discovering the various facets of that dimension and what makes it up and the various nuances of that world, whilst it sounds entertaining on paper, the villain's motivations and scheme, it had very little stakes or potential consequences in terms of the wider MCU world, which only serves to make the central conflict that much less involving. I think a lot of ink's been spilled at this point about Jonathan Major's performance as the villain, and I have to say, considering his past excellent work in The Five Bloods, The Harder They Fall, and particularly The Last Black Man in San Francisco, where he's just fantastic, he's crushingly disappointing here. I expected a fusion of like heavy gravitas and also a cracked vulnerability, combination of some of those personality traits I've seen in his past characters. Unfortunately, you don't really get either. In the more sensitive sequences, he's strangely dampened and flat, whereas in the heftier, more muscular action sequences or moments of, sharper verbal conflict, he's kind of oddly stilted and awkward. His performance has this off-putting, unhinged quality to it that I just found perplexing rather than at all intimidating. I honestly found Namor in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever to be more interesting and competently performed than Jonathan Majors in this, and that's saying something because I'm not really that big a fan of Namor in the Black Panther sequel. The charm is also lost as well in that every single attempt at humor just lands with the most cringeworthy, unceremonious thud I think of any Marvel film up until this point. And this is made even more aggravating by how peppy and springy and smugly energetic and bouncy the direction is in certain scenes. Doing more to evoke the tone of a saccharine rom-com than a high-stakes intergalactic romp. And the wider Quantum Realm cast are also really just underutilized. They're introduced earlier on, with that same really poorly executed humor, and then they abruptly vanish and then forgotten until plot convenience dictates that they must now be shoehorned back in to facilitate certain plot developments in these overly chaotic and cluttered battle sequences. And to me, it just carried the air of lazy writing.
I also found, just on that lazy writing point, the thing that they set up for the character arcs in the beginning, I thought it could have been quite interesting because you've clearly got a superhero who is settled.
Mm.
And which was quite a funny idea to me, just like a superhero who's like, living out the rest of his life as a minor celebrity. And his daughter is now, becoming an activist and talking for the little guy. And, she wants to stand up for what's good. And here she has Ant-Man as a father, and he's kind of past it all, and he just wants a cozy, risk-free life. They set that up. Logical journey for these characters to go on is that by the end of the film, Ant-Man needs to step in and save someone who is not related to him. He needs to step in for the little guy once again. He has to insert himself into a situation for the greater good and not just because he has to. That is the logical story arc. What happens is go into the quantum realm, and within 3 minutes of just talking at each other, man decides that he's just gonna be a hero again, and they like the arc that they set up never comes to fruition. Nobody learns anything. It's that they are in the same place at the end of Quantumania as they were at the beginning, character-wise. And truly, with some of these Marvel films, because we know that these characters are going to live or they can be reborn. We know that Kang is going to come back, so we know that the villain isn't going to die. The only thing you have to keep these films interesting is the character development. How do they change through each film? That's the thing that needs to keep them interesting. Unfortunately, this film just doesn't deliver on that, so you don't actually feel like you've been on much of a journey by the end of it.
No, it feels wholly inconsequential and that there's been like non-existent plot progression. And again, just goes back to that point of how little this actually contributes to the wider MCU. And yeah, it's not terrible, but I was very uninvolved. And at 2 hours, I kind of had my fill halfway through and was just willing it to end.
They also played a lot of the pronoun game, which drives me nuts. They're like, oh, it's because of him, and they're like, who? And they're like, we'll tell you in an hour. It's like, they're
I
like,
love that, the
why?
pronoun game.
No, it's seriously, it's one of those screenwriting things that just drives me up the wall, where they're kind of
Mm.
like, why is this happening? Oh, it's because of him, and then they're just like, well, we're just not going to address that,
Yeah,
we're just
just
going to
just
keep
say his name.
say his name. He's not Voldemort, It's so frustrating. I had a few other notes. 3 words. Are you ready?
Go on.
Shark Boy and Lava Girl.
That's so perfect.
If you have seen Shark Boy and Lava Girl and Quantumania, you know that they have similarities in more than one way, and it's not the ways that you think.
No. Oh God, no.
Uh,
Oh, just so elastic and lacking in any sort of real world grit. That's
Also,
what.
just the guy that's just a big face is totally Mr. Electric, and I won't
Oh
let
my
any
God.
I
I,
won't
d- I
let
had.
anyone tell me otherwise. It did kind of have this kind of Robert Rodriguez feel about it, mostly because of the blue screen that you were talking about before. It kind of had that. No, it did make me think of Spy Kids 3, sometimes because of the costumes and sometimes because of the green screen. It definitely had that kind of look to it. I think some of the colours as well also gave me that vibe. So I was thinking the whole way through Shark Boy and Lava Girl.
That's
Um,
that is the most damning bit of criticism we've laid on Ant-Man so far. Damn.
yeah, I'm sorry, but yeah, Shark Boy and Lava Girl.
True, it's true.
I actually really liked the opening scene, and that got me excited because I actually thought that the green screen and the effects and the world looked really cool in that opening scene, and really disappointed when it didn't keep that up throughout the rest of
Yeah.
it. Even when we went back to that location later on, it never looked cool again. So we
Yeah.
know where the budget went.
Yeah,
Um,
just just because the foundation was so shoddy, it's like, oh, well, you've
yeah.
ruined all the rest of it. This one good-looking location doesn't make up for the rest.
I also thought it was severely lacking the Wasp.
Oh
Um,
yes,
Needed more
very
Wasp.
much.
And listen, got so many characters in this film, and so many of them are underutilized. Like you could have easily scrapped like three characters in this film, given more lines to Hope, and had the same movie. I just don't understand why we are like once again sidetracking one of our female characters in another Marvel film. But yeah, it just that riled me a little bit. I was like,
Mm,
there's actually narratively no reason for Hope to be there. That's not a criticism of the actress or even the character. I think she's a great character. It's honestly just more damning about the writing. Use your characters properly. Don't introduce new ones when you can't use the ones that you've already got.
yes,
Um,
Marvel needs to learn that big time.
oh, totally. And also, the one final point. I was looking up what it meant for the rest of the MCU, and obviously Kang is going to return, and he's actually going to become a much bigger villain because we have Avengers: The Kang Dynasty as one of the upcoming films. This franchise does not need another Thanos.
No, it really doesn't. I cannot tell you how unexcited
Yeah.
I was when you said that they were going to be releasing that Kang movie because I find him so dull as a villain. I'm just like, what are you bringing here? Very
All
little.
he's doing, he's just another kind of Thanos. He's just another, megalomaniac warlord character who thinks that he is doing the right thing for the universe, but he's not because, he's a tyrant. We're kind of hitting this point with Marvel. It doesn't really have many places to go because every episode you need to up the stakes, or every like 4 or 5 films they need to up the stakes. Who's the next villain? Why are they more of a threat than the villain that came before? The problem was is that they started on a villain who could literally wipe out half the universe with a finger click.
Yeah, it's like, where
So
do you go from there?
where do you go from there? And the more powerful they get, the less I care.
Yeah,
Um,
I do feel like the MCU is just running on fumes at this point with how they can put their characters in danger.
what we really need is for it to get brought back down to earth a little bit.
Yeah,
And I'm going to rant about Buffy for a second here because Buffy the Vampire Slayer is one of my all-time favorite TV shows of all time, and I will find ways to talk about it. I'll insert it into any conversation that I need to.
it's always
But
welcome.
thank you. I appreciate that. But Buffy had a similar problem. Every season, the big bad of the season got more and more dangerous. Until in season 5, she was like fighting a literal god, basically. Then the genius thing that they do with season 6 is that there is no villain. It's just three dweebs in a basement, and the demon or like the problem that they've got to solve is kind of Buffy's own mental health or own mental state. And it was genius because it was so much more mature, it was unexpected, and it felt so much more dangerous because it was the characters kind of wrestling with themselves. That's what Marvel needs right now. It needs a Buffy season 6. It needs a couple of films where it wrestles with its characters, where it brings it down to make us care again, so that when it introduces the next big bad, we're actually scared.
That's a really great point. And I think, the stakes of the CGI means nothing and the battles mean nothing if we don't care about the actual characters' struggles and their own personal lives and their own personal attachments and views on these issues, which is one of the reasons that Black Panther is one of the best MCU films because it's has such great attention to character and their own stances on the social issues that they're fighting over. So yes, I do think we need a healthy dose of real world boots on the ground character development.
Sorry, we've massively derailed and we've gone on about Ant-Man for way too long. So let's swiftly move on to Close.
So Close, I saw this late last year as part of the London Film Festival screenings. It's on Movie in I think April the 10th, and it came out in cinemas on wide release on Friday. It's a Belgian drama nominated for the Best International Feature Academy Award, Belgian drama, and it centres on two 13-year-old boys who are just on the cusp of going into high school. They have, as with many people at that age, a friendship that is almost like telepathic in the strength of its connection. They finish each other's sentences. They spend every waking moment with each other. It's a bond that seems wholly unbreakable, like nothing could ever come between them both. And then it's so incredibly intimate. It kind of reminds me of that Stand By Me closing line where he writes on the computer, I never had friends like I had when I was 9. Jesus, does anyone? That's what it really made me think of. Now, as they're going into high school and obviously going through, burgeoning adolescence and going into puberty and big life changes, one of the girls actually in school actually kind of almost sort of cruelly asks them, are you together? Almost kind of trying like incite a response, and one of them goes, wait, no, no. And the fragility of the masculinity there, he kind of withdraws, and he doesn't want to be kind of bends to social expectation and bullying and rumors, and sort of withdraws from his friend. Takes up ice hockey, and it's really just about the breakdown and the distancing of that friendship and how the pain and the anguish that comes with that. For me, the central point of impact that Close is able to capture so brilliantly is that momentous sense of magnetism that is so palpable when you have a deep connection with a best friend like that at that young age. It opens in like kinetically engaging fashion with this propulsive handheld camera work that weaves and dives as the boys rapidly chase each other through these forests and outhouses that surround the area they live in. The camera glides really gloriously and euphorically alongside them as they sprint through these blossoming fields of flowers and crops that are being harvested by the nearby families. It's very prominent in the trailer, that sequence. The bliss in these untouchable moments of flawless friendship and happiness that's captured is really, really invigorating. It absolutely grabs you and immediately brings you into the depth of that intertwined life that they both lead. In these more hushed sequences, the filmmaking is equally adept at completely putting us inside the chemistry of that relationship and the bond. We feel that bond as strongly and as palpably as they do. These really well-framed close-ups that slightly peer into the boys' faces and show, even when separated by the frames in the edit, when they're alone in each frame, that connection when they look at each other is like borderline telepathic, and it allows for terrific moments of space for the young actors to let the coyness and the adolescent glee in their faces and the way they carry themselves in their nonverbal communication speak to the compassion and the love they have for each other in that moment. These softer scenes of their friendship are also made all the more enveloping by this stunning, opulent, resplendent tungsten light that bathes their entire bedrooms, washes it in this really kind of nostalgic glow. We get these lovely aerials looking down at them embracing and sharing the same bed. And what's then really remarkable as we move into the more tragic sections of the film is how the texture of the filmmaking then progressively evolves and represents to the shifting dynamic and gradual collapse of that friendship. The kinetic energy that previously existed, it kind of slowly deteriorates and dissipates. The camera movement becomes more languid and rigid and kind of less energetically motivated. The sense of ease and effortless dexterity that was previously there in the earlier scenes of them playing, it gives way to greater space and distance and separation between them in the frames. Shots that hold longer, it instills like a growing emptiness in the more static angles. There's kind of this great and very significant moment when they're walking into the playground of their high school for the first time on their first day. And in how pulled back and how kind of free form and wandering the panning was. It kind of almost reminded me of Ken Loach, like Barry Ackroyd bit of cinematography. The camera, it kind of, as the boys nervously and directionlessly kind of move through that environment, completely unsure of how to navigate it, or in more macro symbolic terms, handle the seismic change in their lives. The camera appears as meanderingly confused as they are. It's a really great moment, as one of many in the film. The performances of the two boys are amazing. Two of the best performances by child actors I can remember seeing in a very long time, which is made all the more impressive by the fact that one of them had never even acted before, which I just think is crazy. And that juvenile sense of play, that elation and charming immaturity in their interaction early on, it's convincingly childlike and charming. But as the film progresses and takes darker turns, and they're asked to really reach as performers, a tremendous amount is asked of them in terms of like portraying convincingly really great peaks of emotional distress. They're absolutely up to the task every single time. You never get the sense that they are child actors at all, which is a real achievement. If I have some minor complaints, and I do have a few, there is a section towards the middle that features the repetition of a number of sequences in the boys' daily lives. The intent of the sequence is very much to convey the boys as being stuck in this vicious cycle that they're struggling to break free from. And I think it very much communicates that. It's very clearly put across. But the sequence does run longer than I think was necessary to convey that idea. And whilst Close doesn't have a particularly long runtime, it runs a fairly compact 100 minutes. I do feel the condensing of that portion and bringing the runtime closer to 90 minutes would have been ideal and would have made it run the perfect length. In another point, it also reminded me of a film I saw last year called Blue Bayou. It was one of my favorites of that year, as a matter of fact. In that, towards the back end, it did feel as though the director and the script were trying to squeeze every ounce of emotional anguish out of the story. I could have done with a couple less scenes of crying, of like the characters dispelling waterfalls worth of tears. I did feel like they had cried the literal River Thames by the time the film had ended. And trying to ring every emotional bell by the end, it wasn't a deal breaker for me. And I do think Blue Bayou was probably a worse offender on this front. But I do feel though it felt a tad artificial by the end. I'm like, we could have pulled that back a little bit more, guys. I also feel the script could have been slightly even more handed with its waiting between the two boys. Even in the earlier stages of the film, when we get a vivid sense of their bond and chemistry, the direction still very much aligns with Leo's gaze and perspective, and not so much of Remy's, and that it keeps that throughout much of the film. And whilst there is a central narrative event halfway through that does thoroughly justify that decision, I do feel like I would have felt the loss to an even greater degree and felt that power even more if I'd had a more leveled view from both sides of the friendship earlier on. But those are still fairly minor quibbles in the grander scheme of the film. I think it's just incredibly emotive, very powerful, very intimate, and portrays that that anguish that comes from losing a friendship that potent better than m- many films in that I've seen in a very long time. And I think out of the best international feature nominees, this is my personal favorite. I think All Quiet will likely take it, but this is a really, really great piece of work.
I feel like you change your your favorite for this category every episode. I'm gonna go back and listen to what you said last week because I don't think it was this film.
Was it not? I might have said The Quiet Girl, and
I think
I think having rewatched The Quiet Girl, I've finally made my mind up on that. They're
I
both
feel
great.
no, I definitely feel like you've gone through three at least different films for this category.
Yes,
But okay, are
yes,
you locking in your final answer?
yes. Close. I'm giving
Close.
it the grade of I'm giving it the grade of an A. It is definitely my personal favorite for the Best International Feature Oscar. I am holding myself to that. It's out in cinemas now. It comes on Mubi on, I've just checked, the 21st of April. If you have that streaming service, I would highly encourage that you check it out. It's fantastic.
You want to see if it's still Billy's favorite next week? You're gonna have to tune in and find out. So, moving on then to another international Oscar nominee, The Quiet Girl.
I saw The Quiet Girl halfway through last year when I think it was on its general first round of release. It's come back to cinemas this week. I think on Friday again, same as Close. Likely because of its international feature nominee. It's set in rural Ireland in 1981 about a young kind of recluse, very removed young girl who is sidelined and neglected by people in school and also her family. They don't understand her and they don't make any effort to understand her. And considering that they live in kind of borderline poverty, the family, and both, you know, trying to find ways to save money and also just a general lack of affection and interest in her, they send her away to live with her aunt and uncle, who are infinitely more doting and care for her. But there seems to be some information withheld there, something that's gone on in the past that the aunt and uncle perhaps aren't revealing, and it their care and relationship both allows Kate, the young girl, to blossom in her life and develop more significantly. But is there going to be friction in this relationship? Is there going to be some information that changes the dynamic? And much of the drama essentially revolves around that. It's unique in that it's an Irish language film. There is some English dialogue, but it's mostly spoken in the Irish language, which is great to see, as I can't personally think of another film that actually, old or recent, that actually does that. So that's really great to have that representation on screen. The idea of an introspective drama centered on an isolated child that's neglected by their parents is not exactly new. But there are several ways for me that The Quiet Girl sets itself apart from previous iterations of this subject matter. For starters, the composition of the cinematography presents this sense of loneliness without the formulaic methods of shoot the character from far away and high up so they appear small and insignificant. The directorial choices are really inspired and creative and well conceived. There's fantastic use of really purposeful symbolic lighting. It almost kind of reminded me of the symbolic use of lighting in The Godfather, interestingly enough, where they kind of bathe, you know, half of a face in shadow to show sort of moral downturns. Where, you know, in The Quiet Girl, you get these static tableaus of the family sitting in the kitchen in various seats and points in the room, all remaining well lit and visible, whilst we view Kate only in silhouette as she's bathed and almost swallowed in this deep shadow. And early on, we sometimes only know that she's in a room and see her presence from the fact that her shadow is visible on the wall. That's kind of how sidelined she is by everyone in her life until she's sent to live with her aunt and uncle. Elsewhere, you know, Kate is foregrounded and or is only shown from the waist down. Part of her is cut off. We see through shallow depth of focus characters in the background conducting activities and excluding her, you know, rather relegating her to a small space in the posterior of the frame to show reluctance to include her. Putting her in the back would have been maybe more the more stereotypical way of showing her as isolated, but I like that use of foregrounding to show someone is excluded. It's just a different visual technique I hadn't seen as much of. In feel and tone, it's such a beautifully spacious and gently atmospheric work. There's this liltingly fragile and dreamlike score that occasionally peppers kind of lowish in the sound mix these things with these pristine echo laden pianos, you know, it colors moments with this quiet sensitivity. There are these lengthy static wides and long lensed angles that capturing the ragged and dismal claustrophobia of the rooms in Kate's old home, and they effectively convey how these spaces can be densely packed with people, but be decidedly emotionally hollow and unwelcoming. And then you get these contrasts of, you know, alleviated serenity and this brightening sense of peace in her new home. It's elegiac, it's almost spiritual in its stillness and the sense of tranquility it evokes. There's the spaciousness and the soft hum of the enlivening countrysides, which also it compellingly alludes to this sense of otherness, this sense of this separate existence, this exquisite melancholic longing for something that was perhaps previously lost. Again, I'm alluding to this withholding of information I mentioned in my plot summary. The film almost has the register of a bittersweet ghost story, these beautifully atmospheric qualities. They synergize with such grace and elegance to the film's and narrative's really gorgeously compassionate examination of wounds healing, aching hearts repairing, learning to start again, and you know bringing the best out of a person who has been sort of restrained up until this point on a personality level. There's a particularly moving sequence involving the gathering of water from a well and the reflections in the water, which powerfully symbolize this. It's a really exquisite moment. All the while, you have this wonderful central performance from Catherine Clinch as Kate, who convincingly embodies the restraint and meditative view of the world she has in her inquisitive eye, whilst also pitching her more outward and obvious emotional communication at just the right level of expressiveness that felt in line with her character's introversion, but also meant that she didn't feel too constrained or difficult to connect with, so restrained that I'm like, I can't find a way into you for my own investment, no character and personality wise. If I have some complaints, there's a revelation in the plot which in of itself isn't melodramatic or implausible, but its delivery during a somewhat out of place dialogue scene feels clunky and lacking the stylistic finesse that so thoroughly permeates the rest of the film. The admission of the information also feels slightly callous in terms of the tone in the vocal delivery from the character who says it, and also the written feel of the line. That scene as a whole, it feels like a rickety addition that serves the sole purpose of revealing this plot point rather than a natural progression of the character interaction. Also, whilst the film ends on a note that offers great warmth and emotional heft, it doesn't exactly feel wholly conclusive. But I do have to say, on a repeat viewing, that open-ended approach did go over smoother with me. I didn't feel at all cheated and was equally moved by the performances as I was on my initial viewing. I just wonder if something more narrative concrete might have worked slightly better. But again, minor complaints. This is very moving and just really prioritized subtlety and visual storytelling as a way of enriching character interaction. And just, again, another wonderful piece of work and very much deserving of its international feature nomination. I would give this an A as well. It's out in cinemas right now. I would urge you to go out and see it. It's also on BFI Player currently if you have a subscription to that.
Now I'm going to go to my favourite pick this week, and that is Aftersun. So what is Aftersun about?
I would say it's also my personal favourite this week. I've been chomping at the bit to talk about this with you. British drama written and directed by Charlotte Wells. It's had kind of a rapturous critical response. It's had recent success at the BAFTAs with an outstanding debut award win. It actually came out either earlier this year or late last year. I think maybe it was January time. It had its UK release date. It's coming back to cinemas. I wanted to flag this up this week as it's coming back to cinemas for 3 days, at least at the Watershed in Bristol, from the March the 10th through to the 12th. And it's also streaming on Mubi now. And if you haven't seen it on the big screen, I would, really, really strongly encourage that you do, because I love it even more now on a repeat viewing than I did initially. It follows Sophie, a girl who is looking back on the memory of a holiday she shared with her father 20 years in the past, through kind of reliving fragmented memories and video footage she took on that holiday, and trying to essentially reconcile how she viewed him then, and her memory of him now, and perhaps what he gave to her and what he taught her, and how that sort of conflicts with what she potentially didn't know about him, the life he led apart from her, and the feelings he had that he didn't necessarily express to her, and the pain he may have been feeling at the time that she didn't know about. Now, for me, one of the things that's so amazing about Aftersun is how it so perfectly distills and renders tangible the frayed and jagged beauty of memory. We hear this unspooling of video camera, and this beautifully rugged and aged video footage plays and then distorts, crackles, and breaks apart into fragments as we see the central conceit of this warehouse that to me acted as a physicalization of the mind. That's how the film opens. I thought this was terrific the first time I saw it, but it's really dawned on me how special it is with a second viewing. And I believe that's naturally come as a result of collectively viewing the whole work through the lens of memory and the message that that's delivered at the final point of the film. There's so many scenes that were delicately entrancing upon an initial viewing, just for the naturalistic beauty of the performances and the shot choices. and also just watching that relationship naturally sort of unfold on screen without, adhering to a particularly dramatic or rigid plot structure. Just kind of watching these two on holiday just spend their days and growing closer to one another. But viewing it again, knowing what we know about the message and how it all eventually ties up thematically, it made me realize how it was far more tightly constructed than I initially gave it credit for. And I really did just get to the end of it and think, wow, there really is not a wasted scene in this. It's all every moment is so rich in subtext for all three of the main sort of plot threads with Callum, the father's, difficulties as a young father, Sophie's burgeoning adolescence, and again the bond they have and how that's viewed through memory. And I really just think, wow, this is a stunning. I would go as far to say, British masterpiece. I think it's so wonderful. There are so many scenes where there's this beautifully oxymoronic combination of intimacy and distance. There's a scene in a hotel room early on which sees the camera gliding across Sophie in bed as Callum tucks her in, but the low placement of the camera and the framing cuts off Callum from view. Then, as her breathing takes foremost attention in the sound mix, Callum goes out and smokes a cigarette behind the closed door on the balcony, and we stay in the apartment, and the camera lingers on him as he stands on the other side of the balcony door and sort of softly, smoothly zooms in on him. And during this and many other moments, what really dawned on me is that I felt the perspective and presence of the older Sophie, analyzing, surveying, scrutinizing, arguably obsessing over every detail of her father's behavior as I was watching the film. She either remembers these events or she's recorded evidence of them on her camera. And Aftersun so heartbreakingly details that bargaining, that longing, that wondering if there was something we could have noticed or changed, despite maybe being too young to fully understand the challenges of life at the time and what may have really been going on. And yet, these thematic ideas, they're never delivered in a way that even remotely approaches being heavy-handed. It's deceptive, it's luminous, it's mystifying. These deeper thematic ideas emerge forth so subtly and poetically from the seemingly simple moment-to-moment drama on screen, and it also just leaves the perfect degree of ambiguity towards its final stretch. I've had interesting conversations with other people who've viewed it about what they think potentially happened after the holiday. And just enough of the character backgrounds and prior lives and struggles are detailed without feeling at all like clumsy exposition dumps. Reveal of information makes sense within the context of the conversations the characters are having. The script also really deftly balances the stories of Callum's struggle as a young father, Sophie's growth as a young girl, and the bond between a parent and a child. We see the lessons they teach each other in certain scenes, facing mental obstacles and discovering new social situations they're not used to. These scenes, they all weave in and out of each other with at just the right moments. One narrative thread reappears just as we're about to constantly think that, oh, we haven't seen that plot point in a while. And Charlotte Wells carries off that with total mastery here. And this is all pulled together with a central dynamic and relationship by Frankie Corio and Paul Mescal that feels totally lived in and built out, and that has been shaped and grown over a long period of time. The small gestures, the moments of brief physical touch, the comforting ease with which they verbally spar and discuss life, the slight humorous smirking and jabs at each other, and then the smallest, cracks pointing to tortured souls under the surface of that ease and bliss while on holiday. It's one of the most believable and tender and well performed father daughter relationships I think I've ever seen on screen. And I've moved this up actually on a rewatch slightly in my year end rankings, and I just think this is a amazing piece of work that I appreciate even more having seen it twice now. And I would give it an A plus. I would give it my highest rating. It's been given an avalanche of praise from critics, and it's 100% warranted. What are your thoughts on it, Chloe?
I'm going to keep my thoughts brief because I'm aware that we have to move on, but I've got to say that this film blew me away. I only watched it last night. I finished it about 1 o'clock in the morning, so obviously I was an absolute emotional wreck, um, as anyone would be. Some things really jumped out to me that I'm just going to flag up. First of all, I don't think I've ever seen a film handle themes of depression and mental illness with so much kindness and sympathy and realism. I bring up kindness especially because I feel like there are a lot of films that kind of take this approach with, oh, the things you didn't know about this person, treating it as a mystery to be uncovered or something dark or disturbing in another character. This film does not do that. It treats it in a way that actually felt so real and personal and raw. And I've never seen anything, a film like this do it in that way.
I would completely agree. It so beautifully encapsulates that idea of even if someone isn't present in present day now, the and even if they were, if there was like an underlying issue going on at the time, you still always have that memory preserved and can hold on to that and revisit it at any time, as Sophie does. And what they taught and what they brought to you at that specific time will always remain precious and, significant in your development and growth and how it shaped your life. And that to me was, and how it just so perfectly distilled that kind of abstract idea symbolically in the incredible final shot. It was so unbelievably moving for me.
Definitely. Another thing that I thought was just genius with the writing that I only really realised after the film was finished actually was its incredible use of motif and themes, reoccurring themes and images. And I mean, the most obvious one to me is actually the cigarette. You were talking about that cigarette scene where he goes out on the balcony to smoke, and there's a conversation later in the film. Some of the tourists that are smoking something maybe a little bit stronger, and they end up talking about it, and they talk about why people smoke. It's bad for your health. Callum doesn't actually bring up the fact that he smokes in the conversation, but instantly kind of tells the audience that there are things that he is not telling his daughter. And that's just one of the ways that kind of like the image of a cigarette kind of changes throughout the film. The other one is touch and skin, and the way that for Sophie's character, touch becomes something different as she kind of grows up throughout the course of the film. Kind of in memory, there's lots of close-ups of intimacy between couples, between her and her father, the different kinds of intimacy. And what was really interesting is as the film progresses, the meaning of those shots changes for the character without going too deeply into it, but it becomes something that's almost a little bit scary, a little bit unknown, uncomfortable, and then it kind of comes full circle to mean something really pure and something really comforting and, excitement, youth. I just thought that that's such a skill to be able to do that and kind of have the same kind of shots repeated throughout the film, but they kind of have different meanings every time because the characters are developing, like say the memories that you attach to these certain images mean multiple different things, which means that it's so complicated by the end of the film that you're feeling so many feelings because it's all built up over time, all of these images that are coming back. They're kind of layers on layers of meaning. And finally, the last one, which is probably the most dominating motif, is that camcorder and that idea of memory. And there is a camcorder, a recorded sequence right at the beginning of the film is played later. And I don't want to give it away, but when it's played later, it feels different.
Oh yeah.
In quite a dramatic way. So
everything they say in that recorded clip just takes on new meaning when you know more about the characters.
I would put it up there actually. It's one of the best films that I've seen so far this year. Quite happily so. It was beautiful. It was really well written, beautifully acted. Yeah, I can't recommend it enough.
It's out for 3 days next week in the Bristol area and maybe somewhere closer to you. If you're not in the Bristol area, do seek it out or stream it. It's beautiful. It's amazing.
On to our final film of this week. I'm actually really excited to hear your thoughts on this. It looks absolutely adorable. It is Marcel the Shell with shoes on. How many times can you say that fast?
Oh, I'm not even going to try. We'll be here for an hour. It's one hell of a tongue twister, that title, but very charming title as well. So Marcel the Shell with Shoes On, an animated comedy drama slash mockumentary that is nominated at this year's Oscars for the Best Animated Feature Academy Award, based on a series of YouTube short films that have now been expanded into a full 85-minute feature. Centers around a struggling documentary filmmaker called Dean, who was played by the director and co-writer of the film, who is also called Dean Fleischerkamp. And he, struggling documentary filmmaker, he has recently broken up with his partner. He takes while he's finding a new place to live, he takes up residence in a Airbnb, and whilst also kind of thinking about where am I going to live, what am I going to do, what's my next project going to be as well, keep myself financially sustained. And he comes across in this Airbnb a small stop motion mollusk called Marcel, and also his aunt or his grandmother, I can't remember which, I think it's his aunt. And they do just live out this really cute, resourceful existence, and they're tiny. You can fit in the palm of your hand, and you can fit on the key of a MacBook. And Dean both sees an opportunity to breathe new life into his documentary filmmaking career, and also there's this central idea that it's been 2 years since Marcel has seen his family because there were more shells in the house, and when the couple who owned the house and put it up as an Airbnb moved away, they accidentally may have taken some of the family with them in, say, a shoebox or as they were packing away some clothing, took them away by accident. And so it can help Dean's filmmaking career, but it can also help Marcel find his family and become reacquainted with those people, and sort of mean he won't have to live such a lonely existence anymore. Now, you mentioned the words adorable, and it's certainly very, very cute. But and that term has been banded around a lot, talking about this feature. But it's also not just that. The blending of documentary, downbeat existential drama, and humorously quirky, child-friendly animated adventure is really skillful. The naturally episodic and realistically fragmented editing style that's intrinsic to the film's documentary aesthetic means Marcel can really effortlessly move between several different thematic shades in its narrative, from gently comedic slapstick to delicately moving, life-affirming moments displaying, familial grief. And in that way, it actually very convincingly emulates the sliding emotional scales and free-flowing in-the-moment changes of a real documentary filmmaking process. And I think that makes it all the more easy to buy into this world that the film creates and the universal human truths that emerge from the very fantastical character of this small shell with shoes on. It also makes the various story strands connect very cohesively, and for the most part, not like the film has had, weighty drama, shakily appended onto comical vignettes, or like the humor has been shackled with serious moments. The lighting and the cinematography, I feel, contribute to this sense of believability too. The colors are slightly washed out, and the light has this quite elegant and soft glimmer that's very contemplative in tone. It's just somber enough to help gently pull at the heartstrings and enrich that contemplative tone that the film embraces in several spots. But it's also not so bleak and muted that it flattens the humor and heartwarming moments. There's also several entertainingly wry and sardonic jabs at the filmmaking process, particularly that of documentaries. There's a moment where Marcel is confused when Dean asks him, "Can you give me some levels?" referring to testing the audio on a boom mic. He's like, "What do you mean levels?" Because, the inner film student of me jumped with joy at that moment. Got a lot out of that gag. Another where the dog chases Marcel and Dean, has to run into frame to protect him, knocking over the camera in the process and derailing the whole scene. That's very funny. There's a great line where Marcel's grandma, he asks what a documentary is, and Marcel replies, Oh, it's like a movie where nobody has any lines and nobody even knows what it is while they're making it. I felt personally attacked by that line in the best in the best way possible because it's very, very true. It also makes a couple insightful points about how mass audiences will flock to a story on social media and consume the entertainment factor of a character and seeking out clout by finding connections to that story and posting about it rather than heeding the message that that media is trying to convey. In terms of the actual voice performance of Marcel, it runs the finest of tightrope acts. Jenny Slate's vocal cadence for Marcel, because I can't imagine this is how she really talks, although it might be. It has this really infantile tone and this rotund, muffled cadence that's ever so slightly strained and croaky and trembling. It's strange. It's got this really distinctive ear-grabbing timbre that fits the unique and offbeat tone of the film. And her vocal performance, it has enough fluency that it never feels unnatural and it never feels like a real character isn't speaking to us. And the timbre of Marcel's speech, it could have tipped over into grating, but it only just finds itself on the right side of grating, but it is on that right side, and as a result, the character is manages to be endlessly charming, and we grow to have great affection for him.
Jenny Slate also voiced the sister in Heartstopper. She's one of the highlights
Ah,
of that show. She's absolutely hilarious. She's just like a goth girl that like appears out of nowhere in the thing. She does have quite a delicate voice, but I think she
mm,
definitely, clearly put on a voice acting voice for Marcel. I don't think she's not that high naturally, but
yeah, and
clearly
yeah,
somebody up and coming with a lot
mm,
of talent.
definitely look out for her. And her vocal performance is just very. She has this great sarcastic quality and great comedic timing that sells a lot of the gags and the humor and the dialogue. My biggest complaint about Marcel is that in the second half, there are some moments where the film doesn't entirely avoid the trap of feeling like a short film that's been elongated to feature length. After the energetic and involving survey of Marcel's everyday life and routines in the first half, the pacing does wane at times in the second half. It feels as though the writer is slightly struggling to expand the story out to the 85-minute runtime without treading some thematic water. I do think some judicious trimming of around 10 minutes around the edges could have solved this. That being said, I was particularly impressed by the fact that a lot of narrative mileage is gotten out of a plot line involving a potential interview on 60 minutes. Um, it really went the distance with that more than I thought could have been achieved because that came up and I was like, okay, that kind of smacks of something that okay, we're going to put this in a short to bring it out to feature length, but it carried it off really, really well. And yeah, I just thought this packaged a lot of really big dramatic existential issues in a very palatable way that wasn't overly cutesy. It still maintained, that somber dramatic edge, but it was also very funny and very optimistic and very life affirming and also just again very cute and very heartwarming. I really, really enjoyed this. Deserved its Oscar nomination, even if I do prefer Pinocchio. I would give this an A minus.
Ah, well, a nice one to end on, something to warm the cockles. So Marcel the Shell sounds very, very cute. Have we got anything equally as cute coming up next week?
Not so much. So we have or Scream 6 for starters. When will they let it
Oh
die?
God, right.
They should have really canned it in at 5 was the perfect ending, but we will see what 6 is like. We've got Creed 3 again, gone on too long, but has had some positive write-ups, so I'm going in with an open mind. Luther the Fallen Sun, which kind of just has unceremoniously landed in cinemas and is on streaming from next Friday. The cinematic conclusion to the original 5 season run of Idris Elba's British police drama. A reissue of a Sidney Poitier early 70s western called Buck and the Preacher, which I'm really looking forward to seeing, and another international comedy drama called Lunana, a yak in the classroom. Certainly an ear-grabbing title. So very much looking forward to that episode. Very interesting, varied lineup there.
Fantastic. Well, as always, thank you for listening. We managed to reach 100 listeners last week.
Woo! Big
So
celebration.
big celebration, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in and who's supported us making this podcast. It's honestly been so nice to talk to people about it. It's nice to know people are listening and enjoying these fantastic reviews. Well, I just hope we can continue it for as long as we can.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much to everyone who's listening, and we hope you join us for many more future episodes to come.
And we will see you next week.
See
Bye.
you next week. Bye.